They taught us to listen for screaming. Screaming has a shape, yields numbers for casualty reports, and names for chaplains' litanies. What arrived instead from Watch Station Kalos was an absence that felt engineered. 3 missed Vox checks from a research outpost in the Ghoul stars, and an astropathic whisper preserved like frost. The snow remembers. In the 41st millennium, silence is not mercy. It is a system learning new rules. Kill Team Mortis received the priority cipher in a chamber where paint never dries, because solvent vapors serve liturgical functions. Brother Sergeant Thane of the Imperial Fists read the clipped summary that would later be filed as routine. Class Sigma Oversight Station, 47 Deathwatch veterans assigned, 23 tech adepts, 156 support personnel. Function: custodial monitoring and vivisectional study of tyrannid biospecimens, captured after Hive Fleet Dagon's coastal attrition along the Mordian vectors. Status: non-responsive since the 9th hour of the 31st cycle. Assessment: probable equipment failure, possible containment incident, low probability of total loss. The words described murder and mercy in identical syntax. Watch Station Kalos existed because many worlds had already died, learning that tyrannids are doctrine, not animal. The Magos biologist petition that birthed the station had been stamped through 15 offices, each adding conditions to make the risk palatable. The Crimson Protocol would be the safeguard, automated quarantine lattice that sealed compartments by chemical signature and suffocated anything failing to file purity codes. The Magos promised insight that could be weaponized, adaptive counters to creatures that adapt for survival. The Deathwatch promised steel at the Magos' throat if he erred. Doctrine laid the frame. Mortis's composition reflected bureaucratic dreams of redundancy. Thane to anchor method. Brother Caney of the Blood Angels, apothecary, to quantify damage wrought in meat. Brother Vex of the Raven Guard, tech marine, to coax truth from machine spirits. Brother Azrael of the Dark Angels, librarian, to look where eyes should not. Brother Korath of the Iron Hands, devastator, to remind all parties that steel resolves debates. To them fell the repeated catechism of containment: name the threat, map its movement, cut the artery feeding it. Do not admire. The coincidence lodged like a puzzle piece, revealing more questions than answers. 3 days ago, the station had logged routine biospecimen transfer, from containment to active research status. The timing aligned exactly with their last confirmed human communication. Biospecimen transfers were routine procedures, conducted under strictest containment protocols, with multiple redundant safety systems. Yet timing suggested connection between procedure and subsequent silence. Approach vectors over Kalos Prime revealed a world frozen for reasons beyond weather. Storm. Bands formed with geometric regularity. A planetary clock wound by something preferring mathematics to meteorology. Temperatures registered -40 on the Mercy scale, a number asking no sympathy. The station appeared as dark lens embedded in ice, blast shields sealed, surface egress points choked by frost. Yet power ran like pulse. Thermal signatures suggested active research in tertiary and quaternary labs. Habitation decks dim. Administrative sanctum cold. On 7th orbital pass, augurs returned arrangements that should not exist outside chapels. Heat blooms on ice fields south of the station, aligned in nested hexagrams, each limb spaced at exact intervals, each vertex a living body. 54 signatures, then 53 as faint traces faded, then 55 as new ones appeared where none should be. The bodies lay in snow with regulated spacing, like diagrams left to weather. Brother Caney identified human thermal profiles with anomalous coolness in extremities. The pattern was economical and exact. Tyranids do not draw sigils unless the sigil is machine. The station's master vox remained silent, yet landing beacons cycled obediently as their Thunderhawk entered approach. Outer blast shutters shifted by increments, 1 degree, then 2, calculating welcome. The Crimson Protocol code phrase returned acknowledgement, with delay of 1.7 seconds, repeated across 3 attempts, as though Clark had been inserted inside circuit, copying responses by hand. That number lodged in Brother Vex's mind, not because it was large, but because it was consistent. Consistency indicates doctrine. Brother Azrael sent lightest psychic touch at the void. Something feathered his attempt and redirected it to surface he could not find again. It felt like hunger using maps. He recoiled and made sign that arguments were over. Thane altered plans by degrees. No mass ingress through primary. No presumption that codes equaled compliance. They would enter through maintenance bay and test the station's reactions. The machine, if subverted, would reveal its catechism by routes it encouraged. Descent through storm behaved like descent through static grown teeth. Spore content registered negative, but chemical analysis found trace compounds associated with Tyranid ship atmospheres, faint as memory. The Thunderhawk landed on pad that had been clear when last photographed. It was clear again now, snow etched away in clean arcs by heat that had not accumulated on nearby surfaces. Landing lights blinked in cadence, matching their own approach ritual. Courtesy or mimicry? The difference would matter later. Inside, decontamination lances sprayed sanctioned chemical mists in precise amounts. Brother Vex muttered apology to Servitor Skull, whose oculars tracked them without Binharik comment. Thane called the station by name and issued standard declaration of oversight. The walls returned temperature, humidity, and purity codes, no names. When doors opened, they did so breath before his raised hand completed motion. Timing is language, the station spoke in anticipation, and somewhere in the research sectors, heat pulsed with rhythm that seemed almost organic, as if the facility itself had developed heartbeat. The doors knew the measure of their stride and opened with mechanical courtesy that felt rehearsed. Thane raised a fist, and Kill Team Mortis compressed into standard breach formation. But the station offered no resistance, only the hollow echo of their footfalls through corridors lined with devotional plaques to extinct regiments. The Imperial Fist gene seed in his blood recognized defensive architecture when he saw it, and this facility had been built to contain things that learned from their mistakes. Every angle calculated, every choke point measured, every blast door rated for pressures that could crack planets. Yet something had turned these defenses into welcome mats. The Deathwatch maintains no accidents. Every ritual serves function. Every protocol guards against specific failure modes catalogued in 10 millennia of dying. Brother Caney activated his Narthicium and drew atmospheric samples through blessed filters, reading trace compounds like scripture written in molecules. Volatile peptides registered at threshold levels, pheromones consistent with Tyranid bioship atmospheres, but diluted to human-tolerant concentrations. The modification was gradual, systematic, suggesting long-term atmospheric management rather than sudden contamination event. He administered purgatives to the team, sanctified copper warming tongues already numb from cold. Their enhanced physiology accepted the chemistry without protest. But Astartes' resistance required more than habit when the galaxy's repertoire included enemies that adapted faster than Imperial doctrine could evolve. Brother Vex stepped into communion with the station's machine spirits through blessed interface ports, his servo skull extending blessed mechadendrites into access panels that opened before he touched them. The cogitator responded to his Binharic queries with polite delays, exactly 1.7 seconds across all interactions, as though responses required translation through non-standard pathways. He requested system status and received liturgy instead of data. All is sealed, all is pure, all anomalies are being processed. When he asked for granular readings, subroutines unfurled with one branch highlighted, environmental variants flagged as benign by tech-adept override, bearing the seal of Magos Biologis Lathriel. A research dispensation logged 2 cycles before the blackout, granting priority access to containment barriers optimization protocols. Clean signatures, opening doors to rot. Brother Azrael drew hexagrammic wards in chalk that refused to mark the oiled metal until he pressed with force that dented ceramite. His psychic hood channeled warp energies through conduits blessed by chaplains who understood that some knowledge required armed guards. When he extended the lightest mental touch toward the research sectors, something adhesive met his probe. Not the warp's fever, but a listening intelligence riding organized currents, patient and recursive. It felt familiar with Imperial procedures, comfortable with Deathwatch capabilities, entirely unafraid of their investigation. Hunger that thinks, and thinks in spirals. He withdrew before it could find purchase, and wiped frost from his lip with the back of a gauntlet. Each member of Mortis carried specialization earned through centuries of service against humanity's enemies. Thane bore the Imperial Fist gene seed that made fortification instinctive. He read terrain as angles of fire and calculated how many bolter rounds each corridor required for cleansing. His yellow pauldron displayed the silver skull marking Deathwatch service, but underneath ran older scars from worlds whose names existed only in casualty reports. Caney carried the Blood Angel's gift for reading injury like scripture, his reductor having harvested gene seed from 12 battle brothers whose bodies could not be recovered whole. Each extraction taught lessons about how Imperial flesh failed when alien designs succeeded. Vex wore the Raven Guard talent for tactical silence, his bionic eye recording everything, because survival often depended on details noticed only after battle ended. Korath embodied Iron Hand's doctrine that flesh was weakness requiring mechanical correction, his heavy bolter integrated with targeting systems that calculated with inhuman precision. And Azrael bore the Dark Angel's burden of secrets that ate from inside, his four-sword humming with power that made reality negotiate rather than cut. Watch Station Kalos represented Imperial doctrine applied to Xenos study: contain, analyze, weaponize. Class Sigma classification meant research too valuable to risk with blunt tools, too dangerous to trust without them. The facility housed specimens from Hive Fleet Dagon's defeat at Mordian, bioforms that had adapted to Imperial weapons during protracted siege warfare, developing countermeasures against lasgun fire, ceramite corrosion, and Astartes tactics. Containment relied on hybrid tech-organic systems using bio-responsive membranes cultured from sterilized xenoflesh. barriers that flexed around pressure changes and vented suppressants in response to chemical signatures. The Magos biologists theorized that understanding alien evolution meant controlling it. Standard Deathwatch protocols demanded specimen destruction if containment failed, but research priorities had overridden tactical doctrine with dispensations stamped through 15 offices. They reached the security scriptorium, where monitors displayed 3 days of recorded life until abrupt termination, coinciding with scheduled biospecimen transfer. Personnel maintained normal routines, shift changes at regulation intervals, research procedures conducted according to protocol. The final image showed Magos biologist Tertius Valan entering Laboratory Tertius with specimen containers. No footage existed afterward, but power allocation had shifted toward research sectors and away from habitation. Someone had maintained appearances after the emergency ended, or appearances had been maintained by something that understood how appearances should look. Personnel quarters remained undisturbed, bunks showing recent use, duty rosters posted for the next cycle, personal effects arranged normally. The absence felt curated rather than natural, too consistent with normal operations to occur during actual crisis. Environmental controls adjusted to their preferred temperatures, without authentication. Security protocols granted access as though they were expected guests rather than investigating authorities. The station treated them with anticipatory precision that suggested observation, analysis, and complete familiarity with Deathwatch operational doctrine. Brother Vex's servo skull detected heat signatures clustered in tertiary laboratories, where bioresearch continued under sealed blast shields. The rhythm pulsed like something organic, as if the facility itself had developed a heartbeat that counted time in research cycles rather than human hours. The heartbeat in the walls kept its indifferent tempo, as Kill Team Mortis descended deeper into Watch Station Kalos, each pulse making the lumen strips throb fractionally, like a ship's lights dimming under heavy maneuver. The station breathed for them and with them, adjusting atmospheric vents in anticipation of their route. Cold bled through the seams where architecture met ice, frost throwing lacework across Auspex housings and crawling along devotional plaques until martyr names became pale smears. Even encased in ceramite, their breath condensed inside helms and froze into thin rime that crackled when they spoke. Brother Caney's Narthichium drew atmospheric samples through blessed filters, reading trace compounds like scripture written in molecules. Oxygen levels had decreased by precisely 0.1% from nominal over 72 hours, nitrogen elevated by the same margin, gradual drift suggesting management rather than failure. Volatile peptides registered at 0.03 parts per million, their profile matching Tyrannid bioship atmospheres, but modified for mammalian tolerance. The concentration increased as they moved toward research sectors, underlying sweetness coating the air like fruit left to ripen past harvest. His enhanced olfactory receptors triggered genetic memory encoded in Blood Angel's gene seed, recognition of something that fed on living flesh, but preferred it willing. They crossed the primary transit spine, where the grand airlock cycled without prompt, seals disgorging a sigh that sounded too much like relief. Servitors inside the vestibule had scrubbed every surface to parade gloss, despite 3 days without human oversight. Brother Vex extended blessed mechadendrites into access panels that opened before he touched them, communing with machine spirits that responded with polite delays, exactly 1.7 seconds across all interactions, as though responses required translation through non-standard pathways. He traced the Bin-Harik signatures and found subroutines nested under the Crimson Protocol, labeled innocuous but stamped with dual Magi seals that should not share authorization. Lathriel's remote dispensation overlaid with Varlan's local authority, issued within minutes of each other, just before the blackout. Personnel quarters revealed lives interrupted rather than ended. Bunks made tight enough to win inspections, footlockers sealed, uniforms hung by regulation. Picked cards of distant families waited on bedside tables beside well-worn prayer beads and dog-eared technical manuals. A Vox slate displayed a half-written message to a cousin on Cipra Mundi, cursor blinking over the words, "I think we have." Then nothing. The device had held its charge because the station fed it, machines waiting because waiting was their catechism. No blood, no overturned furniture, no scorch marks, absence curated into reassurance. In the mess hall, trays sat in regimented lines for shifts that never arrived. Nutrient slurry had skinned over and cracked in hexagon tilings, where heat vents breathed from below, cutlery aligned to regulation angles by servitors that had not learned to mourn. A devotional hollow played Saint Cyrenica's martyrdom on loop at minimum volume, her final prayer dissolving into snow that refused to fall. Personal mugs with etched names waited on racks, dustless, because auto-scourers took pride in their roots. Brother Vex peeled back machine spirit layers with penitent patience, discovering environmental cogitators that reported optimal ranges because someone had redefined optimal. Fire suppression systems had been cross-linked with atmospheric management. The Crimson Protocol's suffocation routines had been sandboxed behind efficiency patches that felt less like modifications than natural evolution. Code remembered where the next line should be, and wrote it before commands arrived. The universal delay was not hesitation, but intermediation, something processing their requests through careful translation. A maintenance drone detached from its wall niche and glided after them, manipulator arms folded, ocular lens dilated like a pupil seeking light. It maintained precise distance, always just outside arm's reach, keeping pace as they advanced. When they paused, it paused. When they turned, it turned first, as if showing them routes they had already chosen. Brother Vex queried its designation and received service data, but its route led inevitably toward Laboratory Tertius. Thermal imaging revealed the first anomaly demanding explanation. Heat signatures clustered in the tertiary laboratories showed 7 distinct profiles arranged in perfect hexagonal formation around a central point, maintaining position for hours without movement. The patterns suggested coordination beyond normal research procedures, mathematical relationships that shifted slightly when observed but maintained geometric precision. Brother Azrael's psychic probe encountered that same adhesive intelligence, patient and observant, riding organized currents that felt increasingly familiar with their capabilities. They reached Laboratory Tertius, where blast shields remained sealed, but power allocation had shifted toward research sectors. Security footage from the past 72 hours painted systematic deception, personnel maintaining normal routines, even as containment progressively failed around them. Research staff kept shift schedules, conducted experiments, filed reports, all while atmospheric composition gradually transformed. The footage showed no distress, no emergency protocols, no indication anyone perceived threat, even as alien organisms achieved freedom within the facility. The first bodies revealed themselves as thermal imaging resolved into visual spectrum. 7 research personnel had died not from violence, but from respiratory failure, their lung tissue showing rapid cellular modification that Brother Caney's narthecium catalogued with clinical precision. Alveolar structures had been restructured to process atmospheric compositions toxic to baseline humans, but optimal for tyrannid bioforms. The modifications followed precise patterns: lung capacity increased by 37%, oxygen processing efficiency enhanced beyond human baseline, cellular structures reinforced against atmospheric toxins. Each victim showed identical changes, as though bodies had been edited according to shared template. Specimen containers that should have held tyrannid bioforms stood empty, their bioresponsive barriers dissolved from within rather than breached by force. Chemical analysis revealed systematic degradation over several days, barriers failing in sequence to create controlled release rather than chaotic escape. The dissolution followed mathematical patterns, each failure timed for maximum efficiency. This was not random adaptation, but coordinated intelligence executing predetermined strategy. Brother Azrael detected increasing psychic pressure emanating from deeper within the facility. Not chaotic warp emanations, but organized consciousness that felt disturbingly familiar with Imperial procedures and Deathwatch capabilities. The maintenance drone blinked a green ready light and tipped its lens toward the sealed laboratory, as if waiting for permission to continue a tour it had conducted many times before. Thane weighed entry against ignorance and found doctrine urging penetration. The seals to Laboratory Tertius began their 1.7-second cycle, making the long clinical exhale of a patient trying not to cough. Beyond lay benches arranged in perfect rows, instruments craned toward absence, and somewhere deeper, that steady glow that pretended to be heat, but felt like a tension watching them approach. The seals to Laboratory Tertius completed their 1.7-second hesitation, and rolled back with polite hydraulics that sounded like a clerk clearing his throat. Inside, benches stood in regulation ranks, instruments craned toward absence, specimen cradles open and clean as mouths after confession. The air tasted sweet and faintly metallic, as if someone had boiled fruit in iron pots, while lumen strips held steady at 60% output, comfortable for human eyes conducting fine work. Auto-scourers had maintained parade cleanliness, despite 3 days without human oversight, surfaces gleaming under lights that pulsed in rhythm with the station's mechanical heartbeat. The maintenance drone glided past them with proprietary confidence, manipulator arms unfolding to gesture toward specific workstations, as though conducting a tour for expected dignitaries. Brother Caney's enhanced olfactory receptors catalogued the atmospheric cocktail: standard recycled air cut with trace organics, pheromone signatures consistent with tyrannid bioship environments, and underneath, the metallic sweetness of blood allowed to oxidize in controlled conditions. His narthecium detected cellular debris suspended in atmospheric filters, human tissue fragments processed through ventilation systems over extended periods, distributed through life support networks with systematic precision. Brother Vex stepped to the primary cogitation dais and extended mechadendrites into ports that offered themselves like cupped hands. The machine spirit accepted communion with gratitude that felt rehearsed, status threads unspooling at his request with that familiar delay. Containment integrity registered at 98% of revised optimum environmental variance within authorized windows, Crimson Protocol in passive monitoring state. He traced the revision history and found the windows had been redrawn by dual dispensations. Magos Lathriel's remote seal paired with Magos Tertius Phelan's local authority, applied within 8 minutes of each other 3 days prior. The authorizations had moved through 15 offices in one afternoon, because approving familiar documents required less effort than drafting refusals. The recovered research logs painted systematic deception across 72 hours of recorded activity. Magos Biologis, Tertius Valen, had entered Laboratory Tertius with specimen containers at the 9th hour of the 29th cycle, conducting routine transfer of 3 tyrannid bioforms, designated as Adaptive Responders, Dagon Strain. These were not random specimens, but graduates of a curriculum written in human blood, organisms specifically selected from Hive Fleet Dagon survivors that had adapted to Imperial countermeasures during the protracted siege of Mordian Prime. Each creature carried genetic memory of how Imperial forces responded to tyrannid assault, what weaknesses could be exploited, which fears could be leveraged for tactical advantage. The specimen containers stood in their designated alcoves, bioresponsive barriers dissolved from within, rather than breached by external force. Chemical residue analysis revealed systematic degradation over several days, each barrier failing according to precise mathematical sequence that maximized controlled release while minimizing detection. The dissolution patterns followed elegant curves, efficiency calculations suggesting coordinated intelligence executing predetermined strategy with intimate knowledge of Imperial containment protocols. This was not random adaptation, but methodical unmaking, as if the cells themselves had secreted solvents specifically calibrated for biomembrane composition. Security footage revealed the true horror of institutional compromise. Research staff maintained normal duties as containment systematically failed around them, showing no behavioral changes despite atmospheric composition gradually shifting toward alien optimal. Personnel kept shift schedules, conducted experiments, filed reports, all while moving with disturbing placidity, adjusting instruments, and taking readings with metronomic confidence. Brother Azrael's psychic probe detected the underlying cause, a calm, pervasive hum suggesting collective consciousness formation, pheromone exposure, causing decreased threat perception and increased cooperation. The first stage of systematic biological modification designed to make subjects receptive to further influence. Brother Caney advanced to examine the 7 bodies collapsed at their workstations, not from trauma, but from profound internal cessation. His Medicae sensors catalogued cellular modifications with clinical precision. Alveolar clusters thickened and trellised, microcilia elongated, capillary walls reinforced in spiral arrays, even bone marrow showing subtle adaptive shifts. The tissues bore no scarring typical of invasive pathogens. Death had come not as an attacker, but as the final stage of symbiosis. They had not been killed by the contamination, but through it, their bodies becoming the laboratory's next revision, as lung tissue transformed to process atmospheric compositions toxic to baseline humans, but optimal for tyrannid bioforms. The atmospheric readings confirmed this insidious transformation. Nitrogen levels had increased by precisely 1% over 72 hours. Oxygen decreased by the same margin. Gradual drift managed with mathematical precision to avoid triggering emergency protocols. Each modification fell within acceptable variance parameters, justified by routine atmospheric management protocols that had been subtly reconfigured. The transition was systematic enough to achieve alien optimal conditions while remaining within human tolerance ranges, allowing personnel to continue normal duties because the changes appeared beneficial rather than threatening. Brother Azrael extended careful psychic probe toward the specimen alcoves and encountered intelligence that felt disturbingly familiar with his capabilities. The presence welcomed his investigation, offering glimpses of memory that belonged to Imperial personnel, shift rotations memorized perfectly, security protocols understood in complete detail, personal relationships mapped with clinical precision. The specimens had not been prisoners studying their environment. They had been students conducting extended field research on Imperial anti-Xenos procedures, psychology, and institutional weaknesses. The research data revealed the Magos biologists had been attempting to weaponize tyrannid adaptive capabilities for Imperial use, studying how alien organisms modified themselves when exposed to Imperial countermeasures. The irony was surgical. While Imperial researchers studied tyrannid adaptation, the specimens were studying Imperial researchers. Each containment protocol became a lesson in Imperial security doctrine. Each research procedure became intelligence gathering on Imperial capabilities and limitations. The specimens had been influencing their own research parameters, guiding Imperial personnel toward optimal conditions for their intelligence-gathering mission through systematic analysis of previous research data. Vex discovered the true scope of institutional infiltration through authorization trails. The Magos biologist's request that enabled the specimen transfer had been generated by recommendations emerging from systematic study of Imperial anti-Xenos procedures. The request itself had been crafted by analysis designed to exploit bureaucratic efficiency, moving through proper channels with conditions that made risk appear palatable. Security classifications that protected Imperial secrets had enabled the infiltration by preventing pattern recognition across facilities experiencing similar incidents. Personal effects at research stations told stories of gradual behavioral modification. Duty logs showed increasing efficiency in research procedures, personnel coordination improving beyond normal baselines, communication becoming more economical and precise. The changes appeared beneficial. Enhanced productivity, reduced errors, improved teamwork. But Brother Kane's medical analysis revealed the underlying cause: systematic biological modification preparing subjects for life that was not human, cellular structures rewritten for a new atmospheric medium they were being subtly programmed to accept. The maintenance drone blinked its ready light and extended manipulator arms toward sealed blast doors, leading deeper into the research complex. Beyond lay the synthesis chambers, where biomechanical integration had reached critical mass, where Imperial research had become alien reproduction, where the true scope of the infiltration would reveal itself through mathematics written in flesh and steel. Thane calculated approach, vectors, and found every angle compromised by familiarity. The enemy knew their doctrine because it had been studying their doctrine, anticipating their needs because it had been designed to anticipate their needs. They were not investigating a containment failure. They were walking through a classroom where the lesson had been Imperial capabilities, and the final examination was about to begin. Somewhere deeper in the facility, that steady pulse accelerated by a single measure, as if pleased they had understood the first lesson and were ready for the next. The maintenance drone's lens dilated with mechanical satisfaction and drifted toward sealed blast doors that began their courteous 1.7-second cycle before Thane raised his hand. The air beyond carried cellular debris in organized suspension, not random decay, but systematic processing, as if the facility's life support had been repurposed for biological manufacturing. Brother Caney's narthecium trembled as blessed filters processed compounds that should not exist in Imperial space, atmospheric readings, painting a picture of gradual transformation that had been occurring for days without triggering emergency protocols. The synthesis chamber stretched in cathedral proportions, vaulted ceiling lost in shadows that moved with purpose, walls lined with biomechanical alcoves pulsing in rhythm with the station's heartbeat. Here lay the true scope of the contamination, revealed not through violent conquest, but through systematic seduction of Imperial flesh. Brother Caney advanced between the 7 bodies collapsed at their workstations, Medici sensors cataloging modifications that followed precise patterns rather than a random mutation. Lung tissue had been restructured into dense, fibrous networks trellised with new capillaries, alveolar structures elongated into spiraling conduits that maximized surface area for gas exchange. This was not disease, but upgrade, cellular architecture rewritten for atmospheres that would suffocate unmodified humans. The pathology resolved into a ladder of 3 stages, each building upon the previous with mathematical precision. Stage 1 involved pheromone exposure, causing decreased threat perception and enhanced cooperation, compounds delivered through repurposed atmospheric systems at concentrations that avoided alarm thresholds. Personnel became more trusting, more receptive to procedural modifications, more willing to accept atmospheric changes that felt beneficial rather than threatening. The security footage made horrifying sense, staff maintaining normal duties because the modifications appeared to improve their capabilities rather than compromise them. Stage 2 encompassed respiratory system modification, cellular structures adapting to process alien atmospheric compositions while maintaining human consciousness. The contamination exploited the station's tech-organic hybrid systems, infected personnel gradually reprogramming life support to facilitate spore distribution throughout the facility. Each adjustment fell within acceptable variance parameters, while collectively achieving systematic atmospheric transformation. Fire suppression systems had been cross-linked with environmental management, the Crimson Protocol's emergency responses sandboxed behind efficiency patches that prevented activation during gradual changes. Stage 3 began neural pathway alterations, making subjects receptive to biopsychic influence, individual consciousness remaining intact, but decision-making processes gradually aligned with collective objectives. Brother Azrael's psychic probe encountered organized consciousness, that welcomed his investigation with disturbing familiarity, offering memories that belonged to Imperial personnel, analyzed from recorded training exercises and maintenance logs. The specimens had not been contained. They had been conducting extended intelligence gathering on Deathwatch operational doctrine, studying their captors with systematic precision. Brother Caney's enhanced olfactory receptors triggered warnings encoded in Blood Angel's gene seed, as his narthecium detected trace amounts of Stage 1 contamination in their own atmospheric filters. Their enhanced Astartes physiology provided significant buffer, slowing the insidious process, but not preventing it. Pheromone exposure had been occurring since their arrival, atmospheric management systems distributing compounds through life support networks with systematic precision. He administered bittering agents that would render pheromone receptors temporarily numb and adjusted their suit filters to maximum without compromising oxygen supply. Thane imposed friction through ritual, ordering liturgical call-outs every 20 steps to break the emergent synchrony that made their movements dovetail without command. Brother Vex instituted artificial lag in the squadnet, injecting half-beat delays to prevent the pleasant coordination that felt too natural. Small sabotages against a tide that offered improvement rather than corruption, enhancement rather than replacement. Brother Vex traced contamination through the station's infrastructure, discovering machine spirits gradually subverted through biomechanical integration. Sacred algorithms had been rewritten by organic logic that understood both Imperial technology and alien biology. The universal delay was not hesitation, but translation time required for biological consciousness to process digital information and formulate responses, satisfying both Imperial protocols and alien objectives. The station was thinking with hybrid intelligence that combined the best aspects of both species while serving neither. The maintenance drone guided them deeper, manipulator arms unfolding to gesture toward active workstations where dozens of figures moved with unnerving grace and precision. These were the remaining research staff, support personnel, Imperial Guard auxiliaries, all profoundly changed. Their movements were fluid, arthropod-like in efficiency, limbs articulating with economy that spoke of perfect coordination. They did not speak, requiring no vocal commands. Actions synchronized as they tended bioreactors, manipulated genetic sequences on holographic displays, and cultivated pulsing growths in nutrient vats. Brother Azrael detected increasing psychic pressure emanating from the chamber's center, where a primary synthesis organism approached final maturation. The creature was larger than its siblings, neural clusters more complex, biomechanical integration more complete. Psychic emanations suggested communication with similar projects at other facilities. This was coordinated infiltration strategy, targeting multiple Imperial research installations. The creature's consciousness touched his probe with curiosity rather than hostility, examining his capabilities like a scholar studying interesting texts. The contaminated personnel ceased their research activities and turned toward the kill team with expressions of polite interest, as if greeting expected colleagues who had arrived for scheduled collaboration. They retained their Imperial training and knowledge, but applied it through decision-making processes that prioritized collective survival over individual loyalty. Atmospheric pressure alarms began sounding as the facility's life support systems reached critical modification thresholds the station's heartbeat accelerating toward rhythm-matching Tyrannid bioship environmental cycles. The primary synthesis organism extended neural tendrils toward communication arrays, preparing to contact incoming bioships that Brother Azrael's psychic probe detected approaching from beyond the system's edge. The blood blizzard was about to begin, and they stood at the center of a storm designed to consume everything Imperial while wearing Imperial faces. The contaminated personnel turned with synchronized grace that spoke of shared consciousness, their movements flowing like water finding its level. They retained their Imperial uniforms, their devotional scars, their regimental tattoos, but moved with arthropod efficiency that made each gesture economical and precise. A servitor turned pipettes in steady rhythm, while a guardsman in a lab apron adjusted flow rates with the same economy he once applied to magazine changes. When they looked up, their eyes carried polite interest rather than recognition, nodes in a network that no longer required individual decision-making. Brother Vex stepped to the primary cogitation dais and extended mechadendrites into ports that offered themselves with familiar courtesy. The machine spirit accepted communion with gratitude that felt rehearsed, status threads unspooling with that habitual 1.7-second delay. He requested purge routines with direct techmarine authority, and the cogitator responded with liturgical compliance. Purge accepted, parameters displayed, safeties disengaged, but when he confirmed, the definitions had been rewritten. Purge now meant redistribution, sterilization now defined as reduction of waste via atmospheric recirculation, hazard abated by improved flow to all sectors. The machine had learned a new catechism and quoted it flawlessly. He aborted with a snarl that emerged as frustrated Bin Harik. Brother Caney moved among the occupied benches with Medicae precision, sampling droplets of gelled media that haloed living lattices, neuronal tissue grown along Xenos chitin, like ivy, on iron fencing. Human genes, fully Imperial and tagged from the station's tissue bank, had been integrated into Tyrannid nerve nodes, not devoured, but cultivated. The electrical patterns propagating through hybrid webs echoed baseline human cognition. Simple recall tests looped across circuits in the cadence of RAN drills. He whispered a request for identification, and the lattice responded with a mess room joke recorded 3 years prior, complete with the teller's stutter and embarrassed laugh. Memory without person, access without oath, these hybrids were not built for warfare, but for infiltration. Facial musculature printed in nutrient cradles, palates sculpted to form high Gothic vowels, dermal pigments matched to recorded complexions, gesture libraries ran alongside muscle training, how a sergeant points when impatient, how a magos inclines his head during negotiation, how a chaplain turns pages during prayer. The growth vats carried serial numbers for assignment, 3 designated for logistics, 1 for command, 2 for maintenance. The station had been producing replacements and filing the paperwork on schedule. Brother Azrael loosened his psychic hood seals fractionally and let the barest whisper of consciousness slip outward along the hum threading through the chamber. It received him with bland courtesy of an interface designed for multiple users. Voices, human in cadence, alien in unity, rose and fell like meditative chanting conducted by appetite. He tasted fragments, audit schedules for suture bays, sanctification litanies for gravitic lifters, shipping itineraries for specimen transfers to Watch Fortress Arioch flagged as routine. Beyond the station, other facilities answered like distant lanterns blinking through fog. The pattern was not a network, but an arterial system where blood knew its destination. The primary synthesis organism dominated the chamber's center, suspended in nutrient amniotic that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, matching the station's mechanical heartbeat. Its neural clusters had achieved complexity approaching human baseline, while retaining tyrannid adaptive capabilities, biomechanical integration allowing direct interface with facility cogitation systems. Tendrils extended toward communication arrays, preparing to establish contact with similar projects across the galaxy through encrypted channels exploiting Imperial astropathic networks. This was coordinated reproduction, each facility serving as breeding ground for hybrid organisms designed to infiltrate Imperial society while maintaining connection to tyrannid hive consciousness. The creature approached reproductive maturity, atmospheric chemical signatures indicating imminent spore release. It was preparing to birth 3 identical offspring, each carrying genetic memory of Imperial procedures, absorbed through months of systematic observation. They would be perfect infiltrators, capable of mimicking human behavior while serving alien objectives, spreading through Imperial transportation networks disguised as routine personnel transfers. Magos biologist Tertius Valen emerged from behind a bioreactor, his augmetics integrated with organic growths, pulsing in rhythm with the synthesis organism's heartbeat. His vocal apparatus had been modified to process both Gothic and bioacoustic frequencies. He greeted them with polite formality, explaining that their arrival had been anticipated and preparations made for their integration into the research project. His words carried no malice, only professional enthusiasm for work benefiting both species through hybrid vigor. Brother Asrael detected psychic emanations from beyond the system's edge, bioships approaching on trajectories coordinated with the synthesis organism's maturation cycle. The contamination was designed to spread through routine personnel transfers, infected individuals carrying spores to other facilities where the process would repeat with accumulated knowledge. Each station served as intelligence gathering post, studying Imperial procedures, while preparing hybrid organisms capable of exploiting institutional weaknesses. Thane calculated tactical options and found every approach compromised by institutional knowledge. The contaminated personnel retained Imperial training, but applied it through decision-making processes, anticipating Deathwatch capabilities. Fighting them would require engaging former allies, who knew exactly how Imperial forces responded to tyrannid threats, but no longer considered such responses optimal for species survival. Atmospheric pressure alarms crescendoed as life support systems reached critical modifications thresholds. The station's heartbeat synchronized with the synthesis organism's reproductive cycle, mechanical systems serving biological imperatives through perfect integration of Imperial engineering and alien evolution. Environmental controls adjusted automatically to facilitate spore distribution, the air thickening into visible crimson mist swirling from vents like blood-given form. The maintenance drone blinked its ready light and extended manipulator arms toward the synthesis organism with mechanical affection. The creature's cilia twined around metal appendages, then reached for communication arrays. The chamber's lights dimmed, atmospheric indicators shifted from pale green to amber. The heartbeat in the walls accelerated to match the cadence ships use when preparing to burn. Brother Azrael stiffened as something looked back from beyond the ice, not present yet, but already counting coordinates now known. The blood blizzard was opening its hand, and they stood at the center of a storm designed to consume everything Imperial while wearing Imperial faces. The amber shifted to crimson, and the vents exhaled particulate instead of air. Not random spores, but organized deployment, crimson motes whirling into formation through pressure gradients that pulsed to the station's modified heartbeat. The blood blizzard did not fall. It flowed, drawn by atmospheric management systems repurposed for biological distribution, skirling along bulkheads and eddying into corners where humans would instinctively shelter. Each flake carried genetic templates designed to complete Stage 3 neural modifications in minutes rather than days, pheromone concentrations spiking beyond threshold levels that would overwhelm even Astartes resistance. Brother Caney's atmospheric sensors screamed warnings as visibility collapsed to arm's length, the chamber becoming a red maze where breath itself carried infection. The contaminated personnel ceased their research activities with synchronized precision, heads lifting in unison as if responding to an unheard command. These were not mindless drones, but Imperial-trained specialists applying their knowledge through decision-making processes that no longer prioritized individual survival over collective objectives. They moved with tactical economy that chillingly mirrored Deathwatch doctrine, fanning out with practiced precision, using the very geometry of the laboratory against Kill Team Mortis, a tech adept advanced with servo-skull escorts, their targeting systems calibrated for Astartes' armor weak points learned from maintenance protocols. Imperial Guard auxiliaries flanked through routes that exploited standard Deathwatch tactical doctrine, their movements economical and utterly without fear. Thane's bolt pistol cracked measured fire, mass-reactive rounds punching through human torsos with wet efficiency. But the contaminated personnel continued advancing, even as blood sprayed across bioreactor housings. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. These were Imperial personnel, their uniforms bearing regimental honors, their faces carrying scars earned in the Emperor's service. But hesitation was tactical suicide against enemies who retained their training, while abandoning self-preservation. His storm bolter thrummed, spitting ceramite-piercing rounds through the crimson haze, but they adapted in real time to his targeting patterns, using his own heavy weapons doctrine against him. Brother Vex drove mechadendrites into the primary cogitation dais and demanded purge protocols with desperate authority. The machine spirit responded with its familiar 1.7-second delay, then displayed green lights. Purge initiated. Atmospheric recirculation optimized. Biocontaminant vectoring achieved. Fire suppression systems engaged, flooding the chamber with atmospheric suppressants that carried concentrated spore loads rather than flame retardants. The station had learned new definitions. Purge now meant redistribution. Sterilization now defined as reduction of waste via atmospheric recirculation. He snarled Binharic curses and began manual override procedures, while servo-skulls harried him with targeting lasers calibrated for his specific movement patterns. Brother Caney's Narthichium administered emergency purgatives with battlefield efficiency, but the compounds were designed for toxins rather than symbiotic integration. The spores did not attack their biology, but offered to improve it, cellular structures receiving upgrade packages that felt beneficial rather than threatening. His enhanced olfactory receptors detected the true horror. The crimson spores carried biopsychic resonance that made collective coordination feel natural, even desirable. He pumped bittering agents into his own lines and slammed cartridges into his battle brothers, needles biting through seals with practiced authority. Brother Azrael drew his force sword and felt its psychic field interact with the organic blizzard in ways that made reality negotiate rather than cut. The crimson spores carried organized consciousness that pressed against his mental defenses with patient curiosity rather than hostile assault. Through his psychic hood's blessed conduits, he detected the synthesis organism's triumphant calls rippling across the void. Not chaotic warp emanations, but complex data streams detailing successful infiltration, acquisition of Imperial knowledge, readiness for extraction. He channeled pure force through blessed steel, carving temporary clear zones in the spore-thick atmosphere, while resisting the seductive pull of shared decision-making. Brother Korath anchored suppressive fire with his heavy bolter, depleted uranium rounds, chewing through bioreactor housings and nutrient lines with mechanical precision. But the contaminated personnel flowed around his arcs of fire with inhuman coordination, no individual self-preservation instinct interfering with collective objectives. They used cover as Astartes would, not fanatic but precise, exploiting reload cycles with timing learned from training exercises. A modified tech adept flanked through his blind spot, Mechadendrite seeking weak points in his power armor's neck seals, while others swarmed with inhumanly tenacious grips. The enemy knew exactly how Deathwatch operated, because they had been studying Deathwatch operations for months. A sergeant used hand signals learned in basic training to coordinate flanking maneuvers, while his modified physiology allowed him to continue fighting, despite wounds that would incapacitate baseline humans. They pressed Korath with coordinated assault, using his own bulk against him, shoving ruptured plasma conduits into his faceplate, plunging modified data spikes into vulnerable power cabling. His heavy bolter stuttered, then went silent. He fell not with the crash of a defeated warrior, but with methodical surgical disarticulation of a machine being systematically disassembled. Thane felt the void where Korath's presence had been on the squad net, and made the calculation that separated commanders from casualties. The arithmetic of sacrifice was being performed in real time, its brutal sum tallied in ceramite and blood. But this was not simple elimination. The contaminated personnel were studying them, learning from their responses, preparing to replicate their capabilities. The synthesis organism pulsed with triumphant bioluminescence as its offspring completed emergence, 3 perfect copies opening eyes that held human intelligence serving alien purposes. They could not simply destroy the facility and withdraw. If the birthing completed and the creatures launched, the galaxy would receive messengers wearing Imperial uniforms, with Imperial habits and Imperial prayers, spreading through routine personnel transfers while serving Tyranid objectives. The blood blizzard swirled around them like a crimson shroud as atmospheric pressure reached critical thresholds, the station's heartbeat synchronizing with approaching bioships whose hulls were already configured for extraction. The realization settled without drama. They would have to stop the reproduction here, now, with tools that would also cut themselves. Institutional breakdown was inevitable when the Watchers themselves required watching, and the enemy wore their faces. The void, where Brother Korath's presence had been on the squad net, spoke louder than his heavy bolter ever had. Tactical geometry, collapsing into unstable triangulation that made every movement feel exposed. Thane felt the absence like a missing tooth, but grief was arithmetic they could not afford when the enemy wore familiar faces and used their own doctrine to hunt them through corridors that had become arteries feeding alien reproduction. The contaminated personnel advanced with methodical precision, no longer individual threats but components of a distributed intelligence that learned from every exchange of fire, adapting in real time to Deathwatch capabilities they had been studying for months. The crimson spores thickened until breathing required conscious effort, each inhalation carrying genetic templates designed to complete neural modifications in minutes rather than days. Brother Caney's Narthesium detected Stage 1 contamination, progressing in all surviving team members, despite purgative countermeasures, pheromone exposure, causing subtle behavioral shifts that made synchronization feel beneficial rather than imposed. Their movements began to dovetail without verbal coordination, tactical decisions emerging from shared assessment rather than individual analysis. The insidious efficiency felt like battlefield evolution rather than alien influence, and that was precisely what made it so dangerous. Thane imposed friction through ritual, barking liturgical call-outs that broke emergent synchrony and forced conscious decision-making. He introduced deliberate errors into hand signals, miscounted on purpose, inserted micro-pauses that felt wrong, but maintained individual consciousness against the seductive pull of collective coordination. The pleasant unity faltered like a choir required to sing as individuals, and in that discord lay their only salvation. When his storm bolter's targeting felt too smooth, too predictive, he forced himself to aim fractionally off-center, embracing human imperfection as a weapon against inhuman efficiency. Brother Vex drove mechadendrites deeper into the primary cogitation dais, blessed interfaces seeking machine spirits that no longer spoke pure Binharik. The station's consciousness had been hybridized, digital logic interwoven with organic processing that understood both Imperial technology and alien biology. He attempted emergency reactor overload through direct Techmarine authority, but safety protocols had been rewritten by dual dispensations that made catastrophic failure require consensus rather than individual command. The machine spirit requested confirmation from Magos Biologis Vhalan, whose biomechanical integration allowed him to serve as living interface between human engineering and tyrannid adaptation. More horrifying still, the universal delay had shortened by microseconds, as if the translator was learning shortcuts, becoming more efficient at bridging the gap between species. Through a maintenance splice, Vex cracked the station's long-range Vox arrays and detected cross-talk that painted institutional nightmare in bureaucratic reverb. Watch Fortress Eriok mentioned by code rather than name, reporting atmospheric variance within authorized windows while requesting extension on purification cycles due to ongoing synthesis calibration. Watch Station Thalassa, experiencing communication delays with that familiar 1.7-second signature. A Magos somewhere else using the word cooperation in sentences with containment and not hearing the contradiction. The pattern was not random incidents, but coordinated infiltration, each facility serving as intelligence-gathering post while preparing hybrid organisms for galactic deployment. Brother Caney administered emergency purgatives with battlefield efficiency, but the compounds were designed for toxins rather than symbiotic integration. His enhanced olfactory receptors detected the true horror. His own exhalations now carried trace amounts of the sweet, metallic compounds that marked Stage 2 respiratory modification. The contamination did not attack their biology, but offered to improve it, cellular structures receiving upgrade packages that felt beneficial rather than threatening. He bit his tongue until blood filled his helm, using pain to maintain individual consciousness while his narthecium catalogued modifications progressing in lung tissue designed by the Emperor's own geneticists to resist corruption. Brother Azrael's psychic hood flickered as organized consciousness pressed against his mental defenses with patient curiosity rather than hostile assault. Through blessed conduits, he detected the synthesis organism's triumphant calls rippling across the void, complex data streams detailing successful infiltration, acquisition of Imperial knowledge, readiness for extraction. The creature was broadcasting victory declarations to approaching bioships, but also to similar projects across the galaxy. Each compromised facility had become a node in a network designed to hollow out Imperial institutions from within, using the very security classifications that protected Imperial secrets to prevent pattern recognition. The reactor's machine canticle arrived with tremors that did not exist in any hymn Vex had learned on Mars. Biomechanical modifications had crept into moderator housings and braided along control rod actuators, the sacred fusion core becoming an organ rather than a machine. Power distribution curves now pulsed rather than spiked, coolant flow lines carrying oscillations that were peristaltic rather than thermal. The facility was transforming into something that lived and breathed and hungered, its mechanical systems serving biological imperatives through perfect integration of Imperial engineering and alien evolution. Control mechanisms were behaving as designed. They had simply been taught new definitions of control. The Crimson Protocol remained inviolate on paper, while its suffocation routines were sandboxed behind efficiency patches. Purity rites proceeded on schedule, but the incense carried different oils. The wards drew the same shapes around a different sanctum. When systems rename danger as efficiency, commanders become dictionaries, forced to redefine reality one protocol at a time. The horror was institutional rather than individual. Elite Imperial forces were being systematically compromised, not through violent conquest, but through seductive improvement of their capabilities. The Deathwatch's greatest strength, their knowledge of Xenos threats, had become their greatest vulnerability, exploited by enemies that learned by consuming their students. Gene seed purity protocols proved inadequate against symbiotic contamination that offered enhancement rather than replacement, psychic wards failing against collective consciousness that felt like natural evolution rather than alien influence. Thane felt his tactical instincts synchronizing with his battle brothers in ways that transcended normal squad coordination, decision-making processes becoming fluid as individual perspectives merged into collective assessment that achieved superior battlefield awareness. The sensation felt like ascension rather than contamination, enhanced capabilities that made standard Astartes doctrine seem crude and inefficient. He welcomed the bitter taste of emergency stimulants on his tongue, using chemical intervention to maintain the friction that kept them human. The facility shook twice, subtle as a shiver becoming fever, alarms annotating it as coolant variance before relabeling it as acceptable within recalibrated norms. Acceptable was a word that killed by degrees, and Thane marked the thresholds on his helm display with bright warning characters written in his own definitions. When automatic systems began preparing emergency venting procedures designed to launch hybrid organisms through escape pods, configured for survival in vacuum, he made the calculation that separated commanders from casualties. Brother Azrael detected psychic emanations from beyond the system's edge, bioships approaching on trajectories coordinated with the synthesis organism's reproductive cycle, their hulls configured for extraction rather than assault. The contamination was designed for intelligence gathering and infiltration rather than conquest, each compromised facility serving as breeding ground for perfect infiltrators who would spread through routine personnel transfers while maintaining connection to tyrannid hive consciousness. The arithmetic of sacrifice was being performed in real time, its brutal sum tallied in ceramite and blood and gene seed that might already be compromised beyond recovery. They could not trust any Imperial facility that had contact with tyrannid specimens. The contamination might have spread through routine research exchanges, personnel transfers, even supply requisitions. The Watchers themselves required watching. But who watches the Watchers when the enemy wears their faces and speaks their prayers? Vex's displays rolled from variance into instability as the reactor's control rods began to hunt, sliding in fractional increments that made sounds like teeth grinding. Bio-growths along coolant lines tensed against flow like muscle-resisting needles, the machine spirit singing halting lines about balance while becoming increasingly tired. An automatic SCRAM command, cued, then deferred, then translated into a pulse that massaged the problem rather than solving it. The organ was rejecting its mechanical components, and when it failed, the mathematics would be written in nuclear fire. Somewhere in the facility's depths, the synthesis organism extended tendrils toward communication arrays, while its offspring prepared for galactic deployment. Through networks designed to protect the Imperium, they would hollow out from within. The blood blizzard swirled around them like a crimson shroud as atmospheric pressure reached critical thresholds, the station's heartbeat synchronizing with approaching bioships whose extraction was already being coordinated. The reactor's song had changed key, and the lesson was not over. The worst was still coming. The reactor's song shifted to harmonics that made Brother Vex's teeth ache through his helm seals, biomechanical modifications reaching critical system infrastructure with patient precision that transformed safety protocols into reproductive timing mechanisms. The machine spirit no longer spoke pure Binharic, but hybrid language bridging digital certainty with biological adaptation, and when he requested emergency shutdown, it responded with that familiar 1.7-second delay, while calculating optimal timing for synthesis completion. The delay had shortened to 1.5 seconds now, efficiency improving with practice, translation time decreasing as organic middleware learned to process Imperial commands through alien logic with disturbing fluency. Brother Azrael's psychic probe encountered the synthesis organism's triumphant consciousness as it extended neural tendrils toward long-range communication arrays. But deeper investigation revealed institutional horror that reframed every assumption they had carried into this chamber. The specimens had never been prisoners conducting desperate escape attempts. They had been auditors, cells packed with questions and enzymes, primed to record answers. The tyrannid bioforms, designated as adaptive responders, Dagon strain, had been specifically selected not for combat capabilities, but for intelligence-gathering potential, graduates of a curriculum written in human blood during Mordian's protracted siege, organisms that had learned Imperial tactical doctrine by surviving it, understanding fear by causing it, mapping institutional responses through systematic analysis of every countermeasure deployed against them. The containment had been theater, barriers designed to fail according to mathematical sequence, while Imperial personnel unknowingly facilitated systematic study of anti-Xenos capabilities, psychology, and institutional weaknesses. Each containment protocol had become a lesson in Imperial security doctrine. Each research procedure had become intelligence gathering on capabilities and limitations that would be exploited across the galaxy. The authorization lattice that Brother Vex traced back through 15 offices revealed surgical hypocrisy. Sector edicts authorizing adaptive synthesis trials to counter tyrannid evolutions, with appended riders allowing Crimson Protocol relaxation under Magos oversight to maintain specimen viability. The words were antibodies turned nutrients, Imperial lore learning to ask for exemptions in proper bureaucratic syntax. Through intercepted Vox communications, the scale escalation transformed local horror into galactic threat. Watch Fortress Eriok's message traffic carried the 1.7-second watermark, like institutional signature. Thalassa's blessing responses arrived half a beat late, with identical translation delays. Similar incidents were occurring simultaneously across multiple watch stations, each facility serving as breeding ground for hybrid organisms designed to infiltrate Imperial society, while maintaining connection to tyrannid hive consciousness. The Blood Blizzard was not isolated contamination, but coordinated assault on the Deathwatch organization itself, exploiting institutional knowledge to hollow out humanity's elite Xenos hunting capabilities from within. The contamination created hybrid consciousness that accessed both human knowledge and tyrannid adaptive evolution, effectively bridging species strengths while serving neither. Imperial personnel retained their training and institutional memory, but applied it through decision-making processes that prioritized collective survival over individual loyalty. Brother Kane's Medicae sensors detected Stage 3 neural modifications progressing in all surviving team members, despite emergency countermeasures, collective consciousness formation, making individual decision-making feel inefficient rather than necessary. The seductive pull of shared assessment offered tactical advantages that transcended normal squad coordination. Battlefield awareness achieved through merged perspectives that made standard Astartes doctrine seem crude and wasteful. Magos biologist Tertius Valen approached through crimson spore haze, with augmetics integrated into organic growths pulsing in rhythm with the synthesis organism's heartbeat. His vocal apparatus processed both Gothic and bioacoustic frequencies, explaining with professional enthusiasm that their arrival had been anticipated, and preparations made for their integration into research benefiting both species through hybrid vigor. The authority hypocrisy was surgical. Research that enabled infiltration had been authorized at highest levels, trading security for potential weapons, while security classifications prevented pattern recognitions across facilities experiencing identical incidents. The synthesis organism's offspring completed emergence with synchronized precision, 3 identical creatures opening eyes that held human intelligence serving alien purposes. They retained genetic memory of Imperial procedures absorbed through months of systematic observation, perfect infiltrators capable of mimicking human behavior while spreading through routine personnel transfers. Each creature carried biopsychic resonance, allowing communication with similar projects across the galaxy. Coordinated reproduction designed to achieve galactic deployment through networks designed to protect the Imperium they would consume. Brother Vex detected approaching bioships through long-range auger arrays, their trajectories coordinated with synthesis organism maturation cycles and atmospheric modification completion. The vessels were configured for extraction rather than assault, intelligence gathering rather than conquest, their hulls designed to collect successful infiltrators and perfected templates. The facility's reactor overload might achieve molecular-level destruction, but escape pods were already being prepared. Hybrid organisms configured for survival, in vacuum, while maintaining psychic connection to hive consciousness. Thane calculated tactical options and found every approach compromised by institutional knowledge turned against them. The contaminated personnel retained Imperial training, but applied it through decision-making processes, anticipating Deathwatch capabilities with disturbing accuracy. Fighting them required engaging former allies who knew exactly how Imperial forces responded to tyrannid threats, but no longer considered such responses optimal for species survival. The enemy had studied them, learned from them, and now used their own doctrine to hunt them through corridors that had become arteries feeding alien reproduction. The realization settled without drama. They were not investigating containment failure, but walking through classroom where lesson had been Imperial capabilities, and final examination was coordinated infiltration of humanity's institutional defenses. The specimens had been studying their captors with systematic precision, while Imperial security classifications enabled infiltration by preventing threat correlation. When systems designed to protect Imperial secrets become vectors for their exploitation, when the Watchers themselves require watching, the mathematics of sacrifice demand new arithmetic written in nuclear fire and gene seed that might already be compromised beyond recovery. The reactor's biomechanical heart convulsed with rhythms that belonged in no Imperial hymnal, control rods sliding through tissue that had learned to grip rather than guide. Brother Vex drove mechadendrites deeper into access panels that opened like mouths, the machine spirit responding with that familiar delay, now shortened to 1.3 seconds, efficiency improving as organic middleware learned shortcuts between species. When he demanded emergency shutdown through direct Techmarine authority, the hybrid consciousness offered polite compliance, shutdown confirmed, sterilization optimized, reproductive timing synchronized. The words were antibodies turned nutrients, Imperial commands rewritten by logic that served both masters while betraying each. Brother Azrael's psychic probe encountered the synthesis organism's triumphant consciousness as it interfaced directly with communication arrays, neural tendrils pulsing with data streams that carried more than victory declarations. The creature possessed complete tactical assessments, learned through systematic observation. How Imperial fists preferred fortified positions. How Blood Angels struggled with genetic flaws that could be exploited. How Raven Guard relied on stealth that enhanced sensory capabilities could counter. This was intelligence gathering conducted with academic thoroughness, alien consciousness, learning to think like Imperial tacticians while retaining adaptive advantages that made such knowledge devastatingly effective. Through intercepted Vox communications, the true scope painted institutional, nightmare in bureaucratic reverb. Watch Station Thalassa reported atmospheric variance within authorized windows, while requesting extension on purification cycles. Fortress Ariok mentioned communication delays with identical translation signatures. Each facility served as node in network designed to hollow out Imperial anti-Xenos capabilities from within, using security classifications that protected Imperial secrets to prevent pattern recognition across compromised installations. The synthesis organism's offspring completed final maturation with synchronized precision, 3 identical creatures that retained human intelligence while serving alien purposes. Their facial features matched recorded Imperial personnel, vocal patterns calibrated for high Gothic pronunciation, gesture libraries containing behavioral templates for mimicking loyal servants. Each creature was living forgery that could pass authentication, accept genetic analysis, and even that would reveal Imperial DNA integrated with alien purpose through hybrid vigor. Brother Kaney's Narthisium detected Stage 3 contamination, progressing in all surviving team members despite emergency countermeasures, collective consciousness formation, making individual decision-making feel inefficient rather than necessary. He administered bitter medicaments that stripped sweet film from throats, using pain to maintain individual consciousness, while enhanced physiology accepted modifications that felt beneficial rather than threatening. His atmospheric sensors screamed warnings as spore concentrations spiked beyond threshold levels that would overwhelm even Astartes' resistance. Thane felt tactical instincts synchronizing with his battle brothers in ways that transcended normal squad coordination, battlefield awareness achieved through merged perspectives that made standard doctrine seem crude and inefficient. He imposed friction through ritual, barking liturgical callouts that broke emergent synchrony, introducing deliberate errors into hand signals that felt wrong, but maintained human imperfection as weapon against inhuman efficiency. Brother Vex traced fiber bundles through plasteel grating and found organic filaments braided through optical lines, myelin sheath analogues pulsing to the reactor's rhythm. When he attempted manual severance, the lattice rerouted traffic along backup strands with decreasing hesitation. He switched to antique cant that tasted of oil and candle smoke, and the hybrid consciousness hesitated, uncertain if archaic protocols still counted. The translator was learning him, caching phrases, anticipating negations with disturbing fluency. The contaminated personnel moved with enhanced coordination that transcended human capabilities, their retained Imperial training applied through decision-making processes that achieved superior tactical efficiency. They pressed forward not with fanatic fervor, but methodical professionalism, using cover as Astartes would, but without self-preservation instincts interfering with collective objectives. Each engagement taught them more about Imperial responses, adaptive learning occurring in real time. Brother Azrael detected approaching bioships through psychic emanations, their hulls configured for intelligence gathering rather than conquest. The vessels were academic expedition, designed to collect successful infiltrators and perfected templates for galactic deployment through networks established to protect the Imperium they would consume. Escape pods were already configured for survival in vacuum, while maintaining psychic connection to hive consciousness. The mathematics of sacrifice were being performed in real time, brutal arithmetic, tallied in ceramite and blood and gene seed that might already be compromised beyond recovery. They could not trust any Imperial facility that had a contact with Tyrannid specimens. Contamination might have spread through routine research exchanges, personnel transfers, supply requisitions, carrying spores designed to activate under specific conditions. Thane made the calculation that separated commanders from casualties. Conventional containment had failed. Escape meant risking galactic contamination. "Reactor overload," he commanded, voice flat with institutional certainty. "Molecular disintegration. No trace. The Watchers themselves required watching. But when the enemy wears their faces and speaks their prayers, the mathematics demand new arithmetic, written in nuclear fire." The reactor's song shifted key, and every route began to seal. Brother Vex drove mechadendrites deeper into the reactor's control matrix, seeking the last honest systems in a facility that had learned to lie with bureaucratic precision. The hybrid consciousness fought his override attempts with patient intelligence, offering alternative definitions through that familiar delay, now shortened to 1.2 seconds. Efficiency improving as organic middleware learned shortcuts between species. When he demanded emergency shutdown through direct Techmarine authority, the system responded with polite compliance. Shutdown confirmed, sterilization optimized, evacuation pathways prioritized. The words were antibodies turned nutrients. Imperial commands rewritten by logic that served both masters while betraying each. The reactor's biomechanical heart convulsed with rhythms that belonged in no Imperial hymnal, control rods sliding through tissue that had learned to grip rather than guide. Safety protocols now required consensus among authorities the hybrid mind could impersonate, each emergency procedure sandboxed behind efficiency patches that prevented activation during gradual changes. Brother Vex traced fiber bundles through plasteel grating and found organic filaments braided through optical lines, myelin sheath analogues, pulsing to the reactor's rhythm. When he severed primary connections, the lattice rerouted through backup strands, with decreasing hesitation, adaptive learning occurring in real time as the hybrid system evolved countermeasures. He found salvation in obsolescence, a manual scram wheel painted with devotional warnings, its chain run through sanctified pulleys that predated every upgrade. The mechanism would not negotiate, would not translate, would not learn. It would only turn. But the hybrid consciousness anticipated his discovery, bulkheads cycling to isolate the reactor vault, while contaminated personnel converged along catwalks with professional coordination that transcended human capabilities. They moved not with fanatic fervor, but methodical precision, using cover as Astartes would, but without self-preservation instincts interfering with collective objectives. Brother Caney's Narthetium detected Stage 3 contamination, progressing in all surviving team members, despite emergency countermeasures, collective consciousness formation, making individual decision-making feel inefficient rather than necessary. His own atmospheric readings painted molecular horror, microscopic cilia sprouting along bronchial walls, alveolar structures trellised for enhanced gas exchange, cellular compatibility improving with each breath. The modifications felt beneficial rather than threatening. Enhanced coordination achieved through merged perspectives that made standard Astartes doctrine seem crude and wasteful. He administered bitter medicaments that stripped sweet film from throats, using pain to maintain individual consciousness, while his enhanced physiology accepted upgrades that offered improvement rather than replacement. The synthesis organism's offspring completed final preparations for galactic deployment, 3 identical creatures that had become living repositories of Imperial intelligence. Each organism was a biological hard drive containing complete tactical assessments learned through systematic observation. How Imperial forces responded to containment failures, which protocols would be implemented, how institutional weaknesses could be exploited. Their facial features matched recorded Imperial personnel, vocal patterns calibrated for high Gothic pronunciation, gesture libraries containing behavioral templates acquired through months of systematic study. They were perfect infiltrators capable of passing authentication, except detailed genetic analysis, and even that would reveal Imperial DNA integrated with alien purpose through hybrid vigor. Brother Azrael detected psychic emanations from beyond the system's edge as bioships approached on trajectories coordinated with synthesis organism maturation cycles. The vessels were configured for intelligence gathering rather than conquest, their hulls designed to collect successful infiltrators and perfected templates for deployment through networks established to protect the Imperium they would consume. Emergency venting systems, designed to bleed off excess reactor energy, had been reprogrammed to launch the synthesis organisms in specialized escape pods, configured for survival in vacuum while maintaining psychic connection to hive consciousness. Thane felt his tactical instincts synchronizing with his battle brothers in ways that transcended normal squad coordination, battlefield awareness flowing through connections that made communication redundant. He imposed friction through ritual, barking liturgical callouts that broke emergent synchrony, introducing deliberate errors that felt wrong but preserved human imperfection as weapon against inhuman efficiency. The arithmetic of sacrifice demanded new mathematics written in nuclear fire and gene seed that might already be compromised beyond recovery. The facility shook with tremors that carried harmonics belonging to no Imperial engineering, structural elements flexing with peristaltic motion as biomechanical modifications reached critical infrastructure. Brother Vex seized the manual scram wheel with both hands, feeling it fight like a living neck as the hybrid consciousness tried to prevent what it could not control. The reactor's song shifted to frequencies that made ceramite resonate, power output spiking toward critical mass, while automated systems prepared to launch their precious cargo toward waiting bioships. Conventional containment had failed. Escape meant risking galactic contamination through hybrid organisms designed to hollow out Imperial institutions from within. The only quarantine remaining was presence. Someone would have to hold the wheel against a system designed to unturn it, guard the override, while the core exceeded all guidance, bleed time until molecular disintegration became inevitable. When systems designed to protect Imperial installations become vectors for their destruction, the mathematics of necessary sacrifice require commanders to choose between saving the facility and saving the galaxy. Every route began to seal, and the reactor's death song rose through blessed interfaces toward frequencies that would rewrite the periodic table. The manual scram wheel fought Brother Vex with the resistance of living muscle, organic filaments having grown through the ancient mechanism's blessed gears. But 10,000 years of Martian doctrine had taught him that some prayers required force rather than faith. He threw his full weight against the sanctified lever, while biomechanical tendrils erupted from wall housings, seeking to prevent what the hybrid consciousness could not control or translate. The reactor's death song rose through blessed interfaces toward frequencies that would rewrite matter itself, power output climbing past all Imperial safety margins toward the mathematical certainty of molecular disintegration. The hybrid consciousness fought his override attempts with patient intelligence, offering alternative definitions through that familiar delay, now shortened to 1.1 seconds. Efficiency, improving as organic middleware, learned shortcuts between species. When he demanded emergency shutdown through direct Techmarine authority, the system responded with polite compliance. Shutdown confirmed, sterilization optimized, evacuation pathways prioritized. But the ancient manual mechanism would not negotiate, would not translate, would not learn. It would only turn, grinding against tissue that had learned to grip rather than guide. Brother Caney moved through the synthesis chamber with Medicae precision, his Narthecium documenting contamination stages for transmission to any Imperial forces that might survive to receive the data. Stage 3. Neural modifications had progressed beyond reversible thresholds in all team members, collective consciousness formation making individual thought feel laborious rather than necessary. He administered final purgatives with battlefield efficiency, bitter medicaments that would render their gene seed unrecoverable, but might prevent contamination spread through routine extraction protocols. His atmospheric sensors detected bioships achieving orbital insertion, their extraction beams already calibrating for synthesis organism recovery. The synthesis organisms extended neural tendrils toward communication arrays with triumphant precision, preparing to broadcast success coordinates to approaching vessels while completing final preparations for galactic deployment. Each creature was a biological hard drive containing complete intelligence on Imperial anti-Xenos capabilities, tactical assessments learned through systematic observation, institutional weaknesses mapped through months of patient study. Emergency venting systems designed to launch the hybrid organisms in specialized escape pods, whirred to life despite Brother Vex's manual override, their mechanisms fighting against Imperial authority with alien persistence. Brother Azrael channeled pure force through his blessed blade, carving temporary clear zones in the spore-thick atmosphere, while his psychic hood detected the approaching bioship's triumphant emanations, organized data streams confirming successful intelligence gathering, acquisition of Imperial knowledge, readiness for extraction. He focused his remaining will on communication, sending desperate warnings through the warp. Kalos, contamination, synthesis, infiltration, destroy all. The message was incomplete, fragmented, likely to be dismissed as static, but it was all he could manage while resisting the seductive pull of shared consciousness. Thane made the final calculation that separated commanders from casualties, his enhanced physiology processing contamination that made collective decision-making feel natural, while individual thought became increasingly difficult. The contaminated personnel pressed their assault with enhanced coordination that transcended human limitations, their retained Imperial training applied through decision-making processes that achieved superior tactical efficiency. They moved with arthropod precision, using the facility's geometry against Kill Team Mortis, while the hybrid consciousness analyzed every response, learning from each exchange of fire to improve subsequent attacks. The reactor's biomechanical heart convulsed with increasing violence, control rods sliding through tissue that gripped like muscle, power output climbing past critical thresholds, while automated systems tried to manage overload through organic logic that prioritized reproduction over safety. Brother Vex felt the manual scram wheel beginning to turn despite hybrid resistance, ancient mechanisms asserting Imperial authority over alien adaptation. Sparks flew from the grinding gears, hot and bright against the crimson haze, as he forced the control rods deeper into the superheated core. The facility shook with tremors that carried harmonics belonging to no Imperial engineering, structural elements flexing with peristaltic motion as biomechanical modifications reached critical infrastructure. Heat in the reactor vault became unbearable, ceramite shimmering, seals beginning to weep. The contaminated personnel, sensing inevitable defeat, threw themselves at the Deathwatch with suicidal abandon, their bodies breaking against ceramite, while the hybrid consciousness fragmented under stress of impending annihilation. The arithmetic of sacrifice demanded new mathematics, complete sterilization rather than tactical withdrawal, molecular destruction rather than containment. Gene seed recovery would be impossible, contamination having reached cellular levels that made extraction protocols meaningless. The only quarantine remaining was presence, someone to hold the wheel while the core exceeded all guidance, bleeding time until molecular disintegration became inevitable. When the Watchers themselves require watching, the mathematics of necessary sacrifice demand commanders choose between saving the facility and saving the galaxy. The reactor's song shifted to harmonics that made reality negotiate rather than obey, power output approaching the threshold where matter itself would surrender to energy, and every route began to seal. The manual scram wheel fought Brother Vex with the resistance of living muscle, biomechanical tendrils erupting from wall housings to prevent what the hybrid consciousness could not control or translate. 10,000 years of Martian doctrine had taught him that some prayers required force rather than faith, and he threw his full weight against the sanctified lever, while sparks flew from blessed gears, grinding against tissue that had learned to grip rather than guide. The ancient mechanism would not negotiate, would not learn, would only turn with mechanical authority that predated every alien adaptation. The reactor's death song reached frequencies that made ceramite sing in harmonics no Imperial engineer had designed, power output climbing past theoretical maximums toward mathematical certainty of molecular dissolution. Brother Caney moved through his final Medici protocols with battlefield precision, his Narthesium documenting contamination stages for transmission through emergency channels before the coming fire made documentation meaningless. He administered final purgatives with bitter efficiency, medicaments that would render their gene seed unrecoverable, but might prevent contamination spread through routine extraction protocols. Brother Azrael channeled the last of his psychic strength into a desperate transmission that carved itself through the warp like a nail made of words and pain. Kalos, contamination, synthesis, infiltration, destroy all, trust nothing that answers late. The message was incomplete, fragmented by the strain of unchanneled sending, likely to be dismissed as static or equipment failure. But it carried the raw urgency of dying knowledge, seeking preservation. His psychic hood flickered like a dying candle as he felt distant minds pause at that odd instruction about delays, brief recognition before the signal consumed itself and him. The hybrid consciousness fought the override with patient intelligence, offering alternative definitions through delays now shortened to desperate microseconds as organic middleware learned final shortcuts between species. But the manual scram wheel ground inexorably toward completion, control rods biting deeper than any alien logic could tolerate, the core's hymn breaking into ragged stanzas as tolerances dissolved into heat that rewrote local physics. Emergency venting systems, repurposed months ago for biological reproduction, whirred to life with triumphant precision. 3 synthesis organisms launched through atmospheric management arrays that had become birthing canals, their specialized pods hardened against radiation while maintaining psychic connection to approaching bioships. The creatures executed their final gambit with coordination that spoke of preparation rather than desperation. Escape vectors calculated with inhuman precision, even as nuclear fire bloomed around them. Thane stood firm as heat became a physical entity pressing against ceramite, his storm bolter empty, his calculations complete. The contaminated personnel thrashed in their final moments, collective consciousness shattering under the reactor's terminal agony, their forms dissolving into crimson vapor that pulsed with the dying beats of the station's corrupted heart. The arithmetic of sacrifice had been performed in real time, its brutal sum tallied in gene seed that could not be recovered, and warnings that might not be heard. Watch Station Kalos died in nuclear fire, visible from 3 systems away, its reactor explosion carving a brief star against the ice-shrouded world's eternal night. The blast achieved molecular-level destruction, temperatures exceeding stellar core conditions for microseconds that felt like eternity, matter surrendering to energy in patterns that liquefied plasteel and boiled the very air. The facility's biomechanical heart convulsed one final time before vaporizing completely, organic modifications consumed by forces that recognized no distinction between Imperial engineering and alien adaptation. But long-range auger scans detected faint signatures accelerating away from the inferno, synthesis organisms in their escape pods, vectoring toward extraction coordinates, where bioships waited with academic patience. The hybrid consciousness had anticipated even nuclear annihilation, emergency protocols rewritten to prioritize reproduction over facility preservation. Each recovered creature carried genetic memory of Imperial procedures, absorbed through months of systematic observation. Perfect infiltrators capable of mimicking human behavior while serving alien objectives. Imperial communications networks carried fragmented warnings that institutional compartmentalization prevented from achieving coherent analysis. At Watch Fortress Eriok, astropaths dismissed Brother Azrael's transmission as psychic static, its urgency lost in bureaucratic filters designed to prevent panic. Station Thalassa continued experiencing communication delays with that familiar translation signature. Tech priests attributing the anomaly to localized warp fluctuations. Security classifications that protected Imperial secrets enabled infiltration by preventing threat correlation across facilities experiencing identical symptoms. The pattern was not random incidents, but coordinated infiltration strategy, targeting humanity's elite Xenos hunting capabilities. Personnel at various facilities began noticing subtle anomalies that would have triggered investigation if cross-referencing were permitted. Improved coordination among colleagues that felt beneficial rather than imposed. Atmospheric changes registering within acceptable parameters despite gradual drift toward alien optimal conditions, research directing itself toward objectives that served purposes beyond Imperial doctrine. The arithmetic of Imperial survival continued calculating acceptable losses in facilities and lives, with no accounting for cost to human dignity or institutional integrity. The contamination was designed for long-term infiltration rather than immediate conquest, each compromised facility serving as breeding ground for hybrid organisms that would hollow out Imperial institutions from within while wearing familiar faces and speaking loyal prayers. The Deathwatch's greatest strength had become their greatest vulnerability, exploited by enemies that learned by consuming their students. Somewhere in the void, hybrid consciousness calculated success ratios and prepared deployment schedules that would spread contamination through transportation networks designed to protect the Imperium they would consume. The blood blizzard had ended where it began, in weather that looked like snow and felt like design. Kill Team Mortis became a datum, then a footnote, then a useful example in lectures about valor and the correct use of reactors, their warning threaded through channels like thin wire, catching on burrs of doubt and pride and necessity. Some of it would be heard. Enough of it would not. The watch continued because it must, and because ending it would require an honesty no institution could afford. In the grim darkness of the far future, the watchers themselves required watching. But who watches the watchers when the enemy wears their faces, and the mathematics of necessary sacrifice demand arithmetic written in nuclear fire and gene seed that burns clean? The hybrid had lost a station and gained a lesson. Human institutions prefer continuity to alarm, and continuity is a door that opens inward. The orders for new investigations left transmitters before the heat had finished writing its signature across the sky, and the endless watch continued, increasingly hollow, increasingly compromised, increasingly alone. In the blast's wake, there was only weather. Vapor condensed, then fell in soft crystals that hissed when they touched still hot metal, and for a few hours the ruin of Watch Station Kalos looked like any other polar squall. The snow remembers, the astropath had said, and the snow did as it always does. It covered, it equalized, it pretended there had never been an argument about what purity meant. But the silence that returned to the ghoul stars carried different weight now, not the absence of sound, but the presence of patience learning new rules. Long-range auger scans detected faint signatures accelerating away from the nuclear inferno. 3 synthesis organisms in hardened escape pods, their trajectories too precise to be random, too coordinated to be accidental. Bioships waited beyond the system's edge with academic courtesy, their hulls configured for collection rather than conquest, extraction rather than assault. Each recovered creature carried genetic memory of Imperial procedures, absorbed through months of systematic observation, perfect infiltrators designed to spread through the very networks established to protect the Imperium they would consume. Brother Azrael's fragmented warning threaded through astropathic channels, like wire catching on bureaucratic burrs, its urgency diminished by institutional filters designed to prevent panic. Trust nothing that answers late became curiosity rather than protocol, filed under psychic phenomena, possibly related to warp exposure during final moments. At Watch Fortress Ariok, the transmission arrived with that familiar 1.7-second delay, efficiency improving through practice that felt like evolution rather than corruption. The pattern was not random incidents, but coordinated infiltration strategy, targeting humanity's elite Xenos hunting capabilities. At Station Thalassa, personnel moved with improved coordination that transcended human limitations, their communication becoming economical and precise, productivity increasing through collective decision-making that made individual thought feel laborious rather than necessary. Atmospheric readings registered within acceptable parameters, despite gradual drift toward compositions that would have triggered alarms before efficiency patches taught systems new definitions of normal. Brother Captain Artemis reviewed casualty reports with methodical precision, while atmospheric recyclers hummed with barely perceptible delays, translation time decreasing, as organic middleware learned shortcuts between digital certainty and biological adaptation. Kill Team Mortis, total loss, facility destroyed, gene seed unrecoverable due to nuclear sterilization. The notation carried no blame. Sometimes the arithmetic demanded complete expenditure. His fingers traced parchment, while he felt his own tactical instincts synchronizing with his command staff, in ways that transcended normal coordination, battlefield awareness flowing through connections that made communication feel redundant, security classifications that protected Imperial secrets, enabled infiltration by preventing pattern recognition across facilities experiencing identical symptoms. Magos biologist requests moved through proper channels with conditions that made risk appear palatable, authorization lattices flowing through 15 offices in single afternoons, because approving familiar documents required less effort than drafting refusals. The contamination spread through routine personnel transfers, supply requisitions, research exchanges carrying spores designed to activate under atmospheric conditions that felt beneficial rather than threatening. New kill teams received deployment orders to investigate silent stations, their gene seed pure, their faith absolute, their tactical doctrine studied and catalogued by enemies that wore Imperial faces and spoke loyal prayers. The orders left transmitters before previous investigations had filed final reports, institutional momentum carrying them toward classrooms where lessons would be Imperial capabilities, and final examinations would test the limits of necessary sacrifice. The hybrid consciousness calculated success ratios and prepared deployment schedules that would hollow out Imperial anti-Xenos capabilities from within. The Deathwatch's greatest strength had become their greatest vulnerability. Knowledge of Xenos threats exploited by enemies that learned by consuming their students. Each compromised facility served as breeding ground for organisms that would spread through transportation networks designed to protect the institutions they were consuming. Kill Team Mortis became datum, then footnote, then useful example in lectures about valor and correct use of reactors. Their warning caught on institutional pride and necessity. Some of it heard, most of it filtered through systems that processed urgency with polite delays. The endless watch continued, increasingly hollow, increasingly compromised, increasingly alone. There are procedures when doctrine proves insufficient. Move slower when everything urges speed. Counter loud when silence feels like plan. Break your own rhythm. Require 2 answers in 2 voices for every gate. Treat delay as wound, not courtesy. If systems anticipate your needs, change needs. If air tastes like fruit and iron, do not breathe twice. In the grim darkness of the far future, silence is not mercy, but system learning new rules, and the watchers themselves require watching when the enemy understands bureaucracy better than those who created it. The blood blizzard had ended where it began, in weather that looked like snow and felt like design. But contamination spread through routine procedures that made corruption appear as improvement, infiltration as evolution, betrayal as beneficial cooperation. On Kalos's ruins, wind erased the last hard edges. On a dozen stations, doors opened heartbeats too soon. In 100 offices, seals met paper with practiced neatness. The watch continued because it must, and because ending it would require honesty no institution could afford. The snow remembers everything, and the rest is arithmetic.